Alrighty, well, welcome everyone to our March 2025 PowerShell community call. Thank you for joining us for this alternate time zone call. We try and do this twice annually in March and September, where we shift the call to accommodate different time zones. This is a reminder that this meeting is recorded and recordings are uploaded to our YouTube channel after the call. If you would not like to be included in the recording, feel free to drop now. Also, please remember that we take our code of conduct very seriously, and we always post a GitHub discussion topic in the PowerShell repo for each call, where you can sign up in advance if you'd like to demo, have questions, or topics you'd like to be addressed. With that, we'll kick off our agenda for today. I'll hand things over to Jason to talk about DSC v3 updates.
Well, thanks, Sydney. Hi, how you doing? So, folks, I wrote a bunch of notes about what I wanted to talk about, and I don't like them, so I'm throwing them out. And we're just going to talk about DSC for a minute. Also, I noticed that Michael Green's with us, so I encourage him to join the conversation anytime that he wants. My actual goal is that my power stays on. So, first off, let me drop into chat the announcements that went out last week for Microsoft desired state configuration. This is the general availability announcement for release version 3.0.0. And we've got several different announcements. I'm going to take a moment here and show them to you in a second, along with an example. But first thing I wanted to also point out was, you'll notice something else at the bottom there. This is a very active project, and so we're moving pretty quickly. On this week, last week we did the announcement. This week we released DSC version 3.1.0 preview 1, and we expect to be here for a couple of months working through these previews as we move. So it's definitely an active project. First of all, let's talk about a concept for a second. I want to talk about DSC, but let's start off with kind of a basic concept in case you've never had a chance to work with it or think about what desired state configuration could mean. So I'm going to keep it pretty straightforward. Let's take an idea, an example of, let's say, something on a Windows server. Let's pretend for a moment that you want to have a web server on your Windows server. You want to have a couple of websites, stuff like that. But the challenge here will get a little bit more complicated. So there's a couple ways you could do this. You could, well, click through all the graphical stuff and get it installed. The ClickOps way of doing it. But the challenge might be that if you wanted to build like a web farm, you need like 10 of these. And clicking your way through that's not going to be fun. So as a PowerShell automation expert, the next best thing we're going to do is we're going to write the code to automate that. Well, now here's where the next problem arises, is that in order to automate that, and a lot of you have this experience with whatever it is that you're working with that you're automating, you have to have deep domain-specific knowledge about that, right? You pretty much really have to know the product inside and out to be able to pull that off. So here's where desired state configuration comes in. What if you could write basically a very simple configuration file that defined what you wanted when everything was done? I want a web server, 2 websites with these names, maybe throw on a SQL server and a couple of databases with these names, all that kind of stuff, without knowing any of the imperative coding that you would have to do. Well, that's what DSC is kind of bringing to you, the ability to create a configuration file that you define simply, essentially the properties that you want for how you want the system to look, and then DSC can make that happen. Well, how that actually happens is that configuration file that you've just written is calling something called DSC resources. And resources are essentially modules that, if you've worked with DSC v1 or v2, these were modules that you could write what we called script resources or class-based resources. It's these resources that have the imperative code that actually knows how to do the work. Now, the best part is that you could write those resources, but other people could write them for you, and you could just consume them in your configuration. Now, if you worked with v1 or v2, you would now run this configuration. You get a MOF file And you would hand that to DSC. Essentially, you would hand that to the LCM to be enacted on your system for configuration. The concepts are basically the same today with the new release of Microsoft DSC, but there's been some changes with how this works. And so let's kind of dive into the blogs here, and I'll show you a little bit about what's going on here. Now, the funny part is I get to figure out how to use the share button all over again. And let's see if I can grab the right thing. There we go. Yay, I grabbed the right thing. So these are the blogs that I put into the chat. This is the announcement blog. And what I want to point out to you here is referring to DSC now as Cloud Native Configuration Management for Cross-Platform. So here's a couple of things that we really wanted to do. DSC v1 was really focused on configurations around Windows Server, and it kind of grew to the enterprise server line, like SQL and Exchange, that kind of thing. The idea now is let's open up the ability for configuration amongst applications and services. So DSC today defines this a standard way of exposing these configuration settings. But now think about this, not just for Windows Server or even Windows Client, but for all applications and services and embedded things and all the little nooks and crannies that have things that need configuration, not just on-prem, but also in the cloud. Think of Azure, all the resources, your VMs, all the things that go on in there. So configuration to expand, we've made this much more consumable for those environments. And so here's what we mean. We listed out the differences for you, and some of the differences right away are going to be striking. We've decoupled DSC from PowerShell. What that essentially means to you is that you don't have to launch PowerShell to run a configuration. You can now write the configuration. It's written today in JSON or YAML. I'm going to show you an example. And that configuration can be consumed by DSC, which is now an executable, consumed by that without ever having to start up PowerShell. Imagine in environments where you're not running a big server or a big client, but you have a small device, or if you have a small application that just needs configuration, you may not be able to have that entire payload to launch PowerShell. So this makes it more convenient and easier to nibble on. Also through here, throughout the benefits, you'll also see we have a section on the differences, and big difference is it's decoupled from PowerShell. Those configurations you wrote in PowerShell don't work today. The configurations are in JSON and YAML. However, a bit of good news, if you've worked with DSC in the past, you're thinking, but what about all those great resources that I used? What about those awesome resources that the DSC community's been using? Do all those just get trashed? Nope. We love those resources, and those resources are really focused on like managing Windows Server and some of the enterprise server line, all that stuff. So resources for V1 and V2 work with DSC v3 today. We actually do that through an adapter, and you can read more about that in the documentation, but the idea is that we want you to be able to consume those resources with DSC v3. Another thing is something that we're working on. We're trying to see if we can make it really simple that if you're a resource owner and you want, within a couple of lines of code, you could elevate those resources to make them DSC v3 resources and get all of the additional features that DSC v3 provides for you. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that resources today, one of the big differences is also resources, well, think of it as bring your own language. Resources don't have to be written in PowerShell. Now, as I said, V1, V2 resources, those script-based, those class-based, they can be written in PowerShell. But you can now write resources in a variety of languages, and we're working on the documentation to provide you examples of doing it in different languages, like Go or C# or one of the ones I'm really looking forward to is getting out, Python. I mean, that's kind of neat, and it's cool that way. So this means that the folks that are developing the application or the service themselves, the language that they're using, they can just go, oh, I'm just going to make this, I'm going to expose these configuration settings in the language they're already using. Makes it very natural, very easy for them, and more likely that it actually happens. So I'll let you take a look at that, but I also want to point out that We have a couple of other things that we gave out with the initial announcement. How to get started with it. In here, you'll see that you can get started by grabbing the GA from the store. I don't know why I'm stumbling on my words. Oh, using Winget. I can't seem to get Winget and store out all at the same time. But you can also go to our repo if you're working on Linux or something like that, and go to the repo and check it out. Give you some examples on how to work with the new DSE command, how to view resources with the DSE command, including the prior resources. In other words, the resources from V1 and V2. And I put in a little example of a YAML DSE configuration that will install, well, IIS on server 2025. So if you wanted to try that out, and you can see that the lines to send it is simply grab that YAML file and send it to the DSE command with config, get, or set. And it's really kind of nifty if you want to try it out. But also, if you're sitting down to play with this, I want to give you kind of a look to some future things that we've been working on, and some enhancements. We also have a post on authoring enhancements about the command completer that you can use to help out with the DSC command, and with the schemas that you can use for authoring in VS Code. Something else that's coming out soon is support for Bicep. And Bicep is a great language, because as soon as I say Bicep, a lot of people go, oh, well, that's just Azure. No, you can actually use Bicep all on-prem. You can write your configurations in Bicep on-prem, do a Bicep build on-prem. Bicep will then generate the JSON that DSC needs, and then you can just enact a configuration. You can also, and this is what we're working on, and we hope for the next announcement to be able to talk more about, take those configurations, and then, hey, if you're going to Azure, great. You can do infrastructure as code and configuration as code, all in Bicep, in a comfortable environment that you're used to working in. One thing I want to show you, I just kind of want to show you this. This is for the folks that have experience with DSC V1 and want to know how this kind of compares to writing a configuration. So let me see if I can navigate how to reshare my screen to a different share. Let's see, stop sharing here. And now let's see if Jason can pull this off and get the right screen. I'm hoping I can find something called VS. There we go. So I'm not sure how this is getting displayed on the screen. It's kind of wide, but what I'm trying to show here is in the first pane, this is a configuration file written for DSC V1 that does one thing. It installs a web server. Here next to it is a YAML file that is actually in the blog post of how to do the same thing. Now, there are differences here because, well, DSC V3 is different. We've got schemas now that, well, this is going to be excellent to help us in a lot of different ways. So it is a little bit different, but what I find interesting is look at the Bicep example. See, to me, and I'm just talking about myself, it's definitely easier for me to write in YAML than it is to actually write in JSON. But when I sit and I work in Bicep, it's similar, very similar to me to the way I used to do it in PowerShell. So I find it kind of interesting. We're definitely looking forward to your feedback on this. I also do want to point out that the community has been working on a PowerShell DSL for DSE. We right now are very focused, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second. We right now are very focused on building the platform. No, don't leave the meeting. There you go, Jason. So we're really focused right now on working on the platform itself, and you'll see it in the iterations of our point releases that this is a very active project. Right now, we're spending a lot of time working with internal partners, but you're a partner too. So this kind of brings me to my last point. Kind of the call to action on this. Obviously, especially if you're interested in configurations, we'd really love it for you to go out and start to try it out. But even more importantly is let us know if you have issues. But one of the things I really would love to hear about, either in discussions in our GitHub or in the issues, is let's talk about scenarios. Do you have a scenario that maybe it seems like we're missing, or that we're not thinking about? Or do you have questions about where we're headed with certain scenarios? We don't have answers for everything right now, but we'd sure like to have the conversations. We had a great conversation with great feedback yesterday in a DSC community call. We look forward to hearing from MVPs next week, and those of you that are showing up to Summit in North America in a couple of weeks. And then, of course, in Europe, a month or so after that. So we're really looking forward to your feedback around scenarios and things like that. So I've taken a lot of your time. Check out the blog post, that kind of thing. Thank you so much. Sydney, thank you. Back to you. I'll shut up now.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. Next, I'm going to share about a few minor releases that have come out from the team. So the first one I'm going to link in chat is a PS resource get release. We had 1.1.1. So this was a patch release to the 1.1 GA, and this had some bug fixes in it and helped us unblock some partners. So look forward to more news on that coming soon. We also got out a new release of Script Analyzer. This was a feature release 1.24, 1.24. I'll link that in chat as well. And this release had a lot of community contributions, so we're excited to see that go out. And then finally, there was also a preview release of the VS Code extension that contains this updated script analyzer. So please do check out the preview of the VS Code extension and let us know if you find any issues, especially related to this new version of Script Analyzer. With that, I'll pass things over to Steven to talk about AI Shell.
Awesome. Thanks, Sydney. Yeah, I just wanted to share we had a recent release of AI Shell. I will share my screen and just kind of walk through a little bit of what we've changed and what has happened. I know this blog says announcing preview 2. Well, we had a small patch release, so the latest is actually preview 3, but there was just a very, very minor change that just fixed a breaking issue with the Azure agents. So we've had a lot of improvements to AI Shell. We've had broader support for Azure PowerShell and PowerShell generated commands from the Azure agent. Broader support for third-party OpenAI compatible models. We refactored a bunch of code for the sample agents for our documentations. We improved native command error handling and easier way to deploy Azure OpenAI instances with bicep templates and instructions on how to do that in our repo. So everything is kind of linked in this latest blog post here. I'll send this in the chat. But just to kind of show things off a little bit, I'll just do a brief demo. So, excuse me. You don't see too many, changes here, but you will start to notice more changes if you start using the Azure agent with PowerShell a little bit more often. So previously we had a kind of a bug where you couldn't use connect-az account to authenticate and use the Copilot in Azure here. So now that works. So we have coverage with both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell. Additionally, we have create me a resource group with the PowerShell. Additionally, we had the parameter replacement feature working specifically for Azure CLI commands, and we had some minor bugs with some of the PowerShell commands. We no longer have that. We kind of have coverage across the two. So now you can, when you get generated a PowerShell file, PowerShell script, you can see with these placeholder values, you have, resource group name and location here. I can run /replace and get walked through, these RGs, and then sometimes this will work where it shows kind of the locations, but it looks like the query isn't working too well right now. But you can see here now I've generated the actual working PowerShell command that I can use with code post or control DD to actually post it into my working PowerShell session and run it very quickly and easily. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Another thing, we made some changes to the OpenAI agent. We can kind of think of this agent as kind of any OpenAI compatible models now are now supported. So I'll open up my configuration file with my keys removed, just for security reasons. But uh, you can oh geez, hang on, sorry. Um, you can now add different placements in GPTs for different models, such as Google Gemini. Let's see, where are the list here? You can do Olama, LM Studio, DeepSeek, Local AI, Google Gemini, and Grok. There's probably more out there that are supported, but these are all the supported models here, and we have some kind of examples here where you can see, hey, this is what a DeepSeek one may look like, this is what a Gemini one might look like, and you can kind of swap between the two and your experience. So say you have a particular preference for a different model, you are now able to use that in AI Shell. We've also made some improvements to native command handling. So previously, uh, we weren't able to kind of capture native command outputs super well with resolve error or fix it, the alias for resolve dash error. So now you can see here in this screen here, if I have an error, say with Git, they might have some hints and stuff, but you can run fix it and it will actually grab the output here and expose it into the shell here. It's not perfect; it's a little bit buggy, but it at least can cover some of the cases there. Other than that, we've made a lot of doc improvements and stuff. We have a lot of stuff on our repo and GitHub page around deploying an Azure OpenAI instance with Bicep. It's super easy and quick to do. So all you got to do is just add your own parameters here and then run this deployment, and you'll have a new Bicep file, or excuse me, you'll have a new Azure OpenAI deployment that you can manage and configure. So yeah, that's a little bit about the AI shell release. Feel free to check out the blog and install it. And we have some other notes and kind of fun tips and stuff to use AI shell itself. So that's all I got. I'm not sure what's next on the agenda, but I'll pass it to Sydney, who probably knows better than I.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for the updates on AI Shell. I think you have one question in the chat. And then I'll pass things to Sean for the docs update.
Okie doke. Let me get my screen shared here. And there we go. So, mostly maintenance activity over the last month or so. Mikey has been working really hard on the DSCV3 docs. Those should be coming soon. Things are moving so fast in the DSC space, as Jason was saying, that it's been hard to keep up. So he's getting the first draft of the update for GA coming out hopefully this next week, and also he's looking to reorganize the doc set all up so it's easier to find stuff. Uh, on the PowerShell side of things, I did an update to the FAQ for Microsoft Update. I'll put all of this in the chat, links to all of this in the chat. Added this question here that explains how the logic works for updating between LTS and standard stable releases and preview releases. And I also want to call out the community efforts. We had a ton of PRs and files touched by Surfing All Elephant and Ari Hein again this month. Really thank them for their efforts. Helps us with quality stuff in these in our documentation, making things easier to maintain over time. And lastly, let's move this out of the way. As Sydney announced, um, Script Analyzer 1.24 was released, and I'm in the process of syncing the documentation changes from the source code repo into the docs repo. But you can go to the changelog and see what was in this release. There's a couple of new rules or changes to some existing rules. So check that out. And that's my docs update.
Awesome.
Sydney.
Thanks, Sean.
Mhm.
Yes. Um, Next up, we've got Jordan. If you still want to do a demo.
Hey, yeah, sounds great. Let me see if I can share my screen. I think you may need to give me permission, sorry. All right, thank
Yep,
you.
just made you a presenter. Okay, cool.
Alrighty, let's see if this goes through. Okay, is that appearing on the screen or is it still coming through?
It looks good. Yep, we can see it.
Looks good. Awesome. Okay. So I just wanted to do a brief demo around Azure Trusted Signing and code signing certificates within PowerShell, just to sort of give an overview of what's possible and what some potential future steps may look like. Because it's not, it works, but there's a few things that would probably require some changes in PowerShell to sort of achieve and be more viable with it. So for people that aren't aware, Azure Trusted Signing is a service by Azure recently released. It allows both organizations and individuals to sign their code. So whether it's PowerShell scripts, executables, DLLs, pretty much anything that allows a code signing certificate and authenticode using what's an ephemeral certificate. So I believe it's every 3 days they generate, or every day they generate a new certificate, but it's valid for only 3 days. So they're very short-lived certificates. There's nothing stored on your host. You send off a request to Azure to sign it, and everything sort of goes and works with it. Um, One of the key issues that I'm finding these days with code signing, not just with Azure Trusted Signing, is the new rules around certificates introduced, I think, 2021, 2022, just a few years ago, where you now need to store the signing key in a HSM or like a HSM quality protector. So you can't really store it locally on your system. And they do that for various reasons, so you don't leak the key or lose it in any way. But one of the downsides of that is it makes it quite hard to protect that key, and it's quite hard to use that key in situations like CI if you want to sign your content. With Azure Trusted Signing, that's a lot easier. You can authenticate with Azure using an application registration with whatever you want to do. And it basically sends a request off to Azure to sign it, and you don't have to worry about keys, and it can essentially be run anywhere that has permission to do it. So I'll give you a brief demonstration of how you can actually use that. So I have a PowerShell prompt here, PowerShell 7. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sign in using an app registration. So this is just a test one that I've created. I'll delete it after this, but it's going to connect from my tenant and then using a certificate that's stored on this actual computer. So I'll use Connect AZ account to set that one up, and I've got that one set there. The next commandlet is one through a module called Open Authenticode, which is a community module made by myself, which exposes a whole bunch of things that's not available using the set Authenticode signature. So one of the things is Azure Trusted Signing. So the first step is that we're going to create a key object. I'm going to provide the account and profile name. So that's specific to the Trusted Signing profile on my Azure one. So that's just what I've called it. And the endpoint is just ECUS. That's where it's actually located. So I'm going to run that, and I'll get my key object here. There's nothing too special for it. Like you can see the certificate that was used. So like we'll have the thumbprint, subject, and all that information there. But that's just a sort of a public identifier of what's actually going to be used. From there, I'm going to create a test file. So just with a simple content called test.foo. If I was to run that with the all signed policy, so it would actually check if it's signed. It's not, because it's just empty on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Open Authenticode to set that signature. So in this case here, I'm going to sign this test.ps1, so the file I created, using the key. So that's that trusted signing. Sorry, the thing's just hiding it here, but that's just the Microsoft's timestamp URL. And then the default is shard256. So I'm just not going to add that one in there. So I'm going to run that, and if I get the content of that file here, I can see that there's a signature block automatically added. If I do get authenticode signature for test.ps1, we can see that it's signed and valid, and you can even verify that through Explorer. So if you open it up in the properties and the digital signatures, you can see that there's an embedded signature, so it's not a catalog. And then that's the actual signature file that I have on here, and it's countersigned, so the timestamp server and all that information. One of the key things to point out with this certificate, so you can see that the validity of the certificate is only for a very short period of time, so 3 days from when it was actually issued. The timestamp server enables that to be able to actually last beyond it. I just can't use that certificate to sign more data, but I'll get to that point afterwards. And one of the other things, if we have a look at the extended properties, we can have a look at that enhanced key usage where there's this really long OID string here, which is what enables you to uniquely identify a trusted signing profile. So anytime I sign things with Azure Trusted Signing, it will always have this OID value here to know that that has been issued by myself rather than using the certificate thumbprint. So that's the signing details. And then we can see as we try and run this one here, so if we run that with the all sign policy, PowerShell will prompt whether I want to trust it. In this case here, I'm just going to run it without trusting, and it's going to output it there. If I was to run that one again, it's going to trust me. It's going to ask me again. In this case here, I'm going to do always run. So it's just going to trust this certificate forever. So if I run that, and then one more time, if I run this, it will automatically run. What that trust forever step does is it actually adds that certificate embedded inside the authenticode signature into the trusted publishers store. So I'm going to run this PowerShell script here. I've just hard coded the issuer so I don't show any of the other ones in there, but that's just the issuer for Azure. And I'm going to just show some other properties in there. So we can see here that the subject is the one issued to myself as an individual developer. We can see it's issued by Microsoft. It has a thumbprint, so that's the unique identifier that PowerShell uses. We can see our EKUs, and that unique OID is the same as what we saw before, and we can see that it expires within 3 days, so it's a very short period of time. Why this is an issue with PowerShell is because it uses this thumbprint as a way of trusting a publisher. So tomorrow when I re-sign a file using this same key object here, it's actually going to use a different certificate. So when I try and rerun that, it's going to re-prompt me whether I trust it. And that's going to happen every single time I issue a new certificate after a day. So that can be quite annoying. And it's one of the reasons why I have opened up an issue on the PowerShell repo to try and sort of step forward and find ways around it. So one of the things I'm recommending is PowerShell to amend what it actually does to check for this unique OID and whether it's either stored in the registry somewhere or whether an existing certificate with that OID is present and to trust it. And that will basically enable trusted signing to be a lot more useful within PowerShell and consequently allow a lot more people to use these code signing certificates and sign their code than it is possible today. Because instead of paying $300, $400 for a certificate, finding a way of storing it and then somehow using it in a CI pipeline, you now have this, I think it's $10 a month to use this one here for like 5,000 signatures on there. So it's very cheap compared to before. It's really easy to get your identity verified. I was quite surprised. I did it within 20-30 minutes. And because it's connected all through the Azure side, it's a lot easier to get that all set up and running in CI pipelines. The example that I did here was using the Open Authenticode module, which, as I said, is a third-party module written by myself. If you don't trust me, which is totally fair, I understand that one there. There are integrations and ways of actually getting it working with Sign Tool. So that's the built-in, that's Microsoft's provided tool. There's also some like GitHub and Azure pipeline actions that you can use that automatically set this all up and essentially call Sign Tool in the background, but set everything up and get everything working for you. So there's definitely ways of doing it through Microsoft supported methods. PowerShell's just a bit more limited, but there's ways around it. And I hope with this demo, you can see sort of how easy it is to use it with some tools. And we can try and get the ball rolling within PowerShell and find ways of making that sort of publisher check a bit easier to use for people, because right now it's not really ideal to use it with PowerShell code. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to chat on Discord or my repo or anywhere that you can get in touch with me. I'm happy to talk about it more and look at it. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks for the topic and the demo and the great explanation. We can end the call there today. Thank you so much for all joining today, and we'll be back in April, both at PowerShell Summit and then at our regular time for the community call in April. So looking forward to seeing you all then. Thanks, everyone.